Testing, testing. Uh-oh, I've got the wrong resolution. Hold on a sec. Let me try to change the resolution here. I've got it at 720p because I was doing a different meeting. And I think that's the wrong resolution, and it's not going to look good on your side. So 1 second here. Let's see if I can get the correct resolution. So I'm going to go for 1080p. But I don't think YouTube's going to correct. Let me see. Let me try to press done and then correct the page. Refresh the page. See if YouTube corrects. No, it doesn't. Wonder what the stream quality is like. Let's see here. I'm just going to do a little bit of test. I think so. I've got the stream going in, but it's streaming at 720p max, and I don't know if that's good enough quality. So we're going to do a little bit of a check here, and I'm just going to focus in on the mic. I'm going to focus in there. And then I'm going to see what it looks like on my screen and see, put some drawing on the screen. We might have to reset the stream with the correct quality. So don't worry, I'm not going to sing for you. I could. You wouldn't like it, trust me. Okay, let's see up on the screen here. Put Ryan and have a look at what it looks like on my monitor. How does the stream quality look? Does it look okay? I'm just waiting to see show up on the monitor. Do we have to reset the screen to get, or the stream to get 1080p, or what do you think? You think 720p is okay? I put on the wrong settings at the start. I'll leave it up to the class. Just put on the chat if you feel that's acceptable quality. If not, we'll restart the stream. Looks pretty good. Okay, looks good. All right, sorry, 720p it's going to be. I would like to stream at 4K if possible, but the problem is if I stream at 4K, then, well, a few things. It goes down to 24 frames a second, which is fine. That's cinematic, gamers know. But it also, another thing it does is it makes too much of a delay between your chat and me. Now it's only about a 5-second delay, but if I go to 4K, it ends up being something like a 30-second or 60-second delay, which is unacceptable, right? Okay, so we'll just stay at 720p, and we will continue on here. Well, everyone, looks like we have a quorum. Looks 11 viewers, so thank you very much for joining another one of these super boring classes. Well, I hope they're not super boring for you. They're not super boring for me. I absolutely love it, and I miss you guys every time. I'm like, oh, is it class time yet? And I love getting up here for you. I got my pin on here, and I don't know if you can see it. It says, don't panic. So it's a don't panic week. Not because of the course content we're about to discuss, which is very easy. It's just a continuation from Firewall D and the stuff we talked about last week. And it's not a long class either, but you'll get the lab this week and a whole bunch of other things. The don't panic pin is because I don't want you to panic about the midterm practical portion that we've been talking about. So, you know, we'll have a little time to discuss that as well. So, you know, as I'm presenting, why don't you just, you know, if you have any questions about the midterm practical exam that I gave you, put them in the chat, and then, you know, as we have some time between all the stuff, I'll try to address some of your questions there. So, yeah, but don't panic on that. It's, you know, I know some people are already started going through it and making some good progress. So it's really not that tough. It's just more of trying to make my. How can I make my screen smaller? The text smaller. Not scrolling. Hold on 1 second here. Okay, well, I guess that's going to be it. I'm just trying to make my chat screen a little smaller. You're stuck on the task to perform number 7. Yeah, 7 is where, you know, the more the meat and potatoes of it are. There's a lot of stuff that needs to go on there. So, you know, if you know, feel free to also reach out to some of your classmates as well if you're stuck there. It is a tougher assignment. I just realized this is the wrong way. it is a tough thing, right? It's not like just a normal assignment. You have to start putting everything together. And even in the assignment, I ask a lot of tough questions on number 7 and 8. That's where the meat and the potatoes are. Now, this is relevant to what you would be doing in the everyday world. You're not just going to get one little permissions thing to do on one little file. You would have to set up a whole server. So take your time, work through it. If you have any specific questions, message me in Teams. I've had a lot of questions the last couple weeks. So if you've emailed me and I didn't get back to you, I have been stupid busy, like crazy with my normal job and this job, and make sure that I develop high quality stuff for you guys, because I'm changing this course around and these things are coming too hot off the plate. So if you've tried to get a hold of me and I haven't returned your message, try again. Just email me after here, send me another Teams. I'm not ignoring you. It's probably because I just had so many, right? So I try to make sure I took care of everyone. Oh, was I? Yeah, no, Lily, I did see your last comment. I know I didn't reply back, but I don't think it warranted a reply. It was something else. But anyways, okay, cool. Thank you everyone again for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Here's the overview of this class. So last class we talked about Firewall D. We're going to quickly go over that again. We're going to talk about firewall zones, and we're going to talk about firewall services. We're going to do a lab 1, which we didn't do last time. Then we're going to look at how you can control all this stuff using Cockpit, because Cockpit is the fun way to do it, right? You don't have to remember all those funky command line tools. And Cockpit is, it's a GUI tool, it's a web GUI tool, but since Red Hat distributed it, I'm happy with, you guys being able to use that. Now, one thing I have to say about Cockpit is that, remember, Cockpit is not going to be on every server out in the wild there. If you're working for a smaller business and you set up the server and you have control over that server, sure, you can set up Cockpit or whatever, if it's RHEL or CentOS or whatever. But usually, like in a data center, they're not going to put Cockpit on every server. So you're still going to have to know the command line tools. You're not always going to be able to use this. But if you're in a corporation and there's maybe 10 or 15 Linux servers or whatever, and your job is to overlook one of those servers because you guys are the experts, and you want some maybe first level juniors to be able to manage this, look at the firewall rules, you can always install Cockpit. It's a great way to do. But another thing is you can't always do things in Cockpit that you can on the command line. Cockpit is just a simple interface that doesn't always have the advanced features that you could with, using firewall command, which is the way we control the firewall D, from the command line. It's firewall-command. And so that is the more advanced way to control the firewall. Okay. So, for the most part, if you're just adding simple services and stuff, and you'll see this in these labs, Cockpit is an easy way to do that. And if you want, to audit purposes, if there's, you have to look at the services and everything that are on Firewall D on a monthly basis, it's pretty easy just to take a snapshot of the services that are in Cockpit. We'll demonstrate that. But again, firewall command, you're not always going to remember all the commands. I get that, but you have to know it exists. You have to know how to use it, and you have to know where the man pages are and whatnot. Get familiarity with it, because you're going to be mostly using this kind of command in the wild. Okay, so we're going to look at Cockpit very briefly, and then we're going to do lab 2, which is on Cockpit. It's a very brief lab. Then we're going to look at the firewall rules. How do we add them? What can we do? How do we add services? How do we add specific ports and protocols and whatnot? And inside the assignment, there's a lot of stuff that I have set up for you and have you looking through that we're not actually going to present in the presentation. I'm going to try to keep the presentation very short, because I know you currently have a practical midterm assessment going on, right? So this is going to be a short class, going to be a short lab, no biggie. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about Firewall D. This is just review from last week, and so I know some people were not able to join us on Friday, and I hope that you were able to look back. So I'm not going to go all through this. I'm not going to take my time going through this. I'm just going to review, since maybe you forgot from last week. Firewall D is the primary network firewall for CentOS and RHEL 8. The D in the firewall stands for daemon or service, right? We call services that always listen, we call them daemons. And it's actually spelled like that with an A in there. So some people say daemon, you'll hear that sometimes, but I think the correct pronunciation is daemon, and A is silent or something, I don't know. Weird English, right? And it's easy to use and easy to understand. We use zone, something called a zone, to simplify network traffic flows. So for example, when a network packet comes into a firewall, what happens is it has to determine which zone is going to use. And the zones are basically just a list of rules that the firewall will accept or deny. And so when the packet comes in, the firewall tries to determine, hey, what zone's going to be, what list of rules am I going to follow here to route this or to let this packet in or block or allow this packet. And so the first decision it tries to make, it says, does the source IP of this packet, 8888, exist as assigned to one of these zones? And we're going to go through the zones in a second. If not, and most of the time it doesn't, it goes on to this, and it says, is the network card associated with the zone specifically? And if not, and most of the time on simple machines it's not, it uses the default zone. And the default zone is, more often than not, especially when you guys install from a minimal install, it will be the public zone. The public zone will be the default zone. So I'm just going to put that up here. And so I say default zone is the public zone. Now, this isn't always the default zone. This is just the default zone set up when you install for the first time. So I guarantee you, I'm 99.999959, so that's a lot of nines, sure that your default zone is going to be the public zone. Okay, so let's just put that to rest right now. Don't worry about it, okay? You'll see. Okay, so what it's going to say is if this is no and this is no, then it's going to use the default zone, which is the public zone, which is, for our purposes, it's always going to be using the public zone. We're not going to mess with zones too much, okay? We want to touch on firewall D and get on, right? And as we go through the different assignments, going from this point forward, I'm going to have you issuing firewall D commands. And sometimes we might be touching a different zone or whatnot, but you'll learn those more advanced commands as we learn other stuff, okay? So moving on, zones permit traffic if a port or protocol inside that zone, like a rule, matches a list of defined rules. Zones will deny any other unmatched protocols or ports not in that zone definition. And the exception is the trusted zone, which permits all traffic regardless. So here's how a traffic moves through a zone. Traffic network packet comes in, it goes into the firewall. The firewall makes a determination. Is the port or protocol inside that zone? Is it defined like TCP/22? Does that exist in this list? If so, it allows the traffic. If not, sorry, denies the traffic. Here's a real example. We have TCP port 22 TCP now. It comes into the firewall. It comes down here and checks, is this port TCP/22 allowed in the zone list? Yes, it accepts traffic. Way it goes. That easy. We have a bunch of predefined zones, and I'm not going to go through all these again because this is just review from last week, but you can see we have 6 zones set up by default, and the public zone I have highlighted in green here because it is the default zone that will be used, okay? Unless you change it, you can change the default zone, but just keep it as the public zone. Don't worry about it. The trusted zone, I just talked about that. If you divert packets to the trusted zone, everything will be trusted, and it's like you don't even have a firewall. And the block will block everything, and the drop will drop all new incoming traffic. So there's also a bunch of predefined services that are already set up in your firewall rules. Like if you look in the public zone, you'll see 3 of these. So the one that we're really worried about, the one that actually we use, and that's set up by default, is SSH. So when you look later on in your the firewall rules, you'll see SSH already configured there for you. And you'll also see DHCP version 6 client in here as well, okay? So So, you know, the main thing is we want to worry about this one. That's the one that we used XShell or SSH to get into our machine. If we didn't have SSH in the zone already set up by default, we wouldn't be able to XShell in without actually modifying or modifying the rules in the firewall or taking the firewall down, which either of which we did not do when we used XShell to get in for the first time. So here's the firewall command. This is this command right here. I've written up here, firewall command, and no, this is not firewall command dash AVD, ADV. I was just saying that's an advanced command. And this is just a simple command, right? This cockpit is just used for simple purposes. So we have the firewall command, and the firewall-cmd allows the configuration of the firewall D service. And you can use the -- list all parameter there to list, and this is what it gives you when you do a list all. And you have to use sudo as well to check this out. But you can see in here, there's already some services defined. We have Cockpit because you install Cockpit, and Cockpit automatically configured a service that's allowed inside in the firewall when you install Cockpit. That's why you could connect to port 9090 and you didn't actually have to touch the firewall, but the firewall was up. You just didn't know it because Cockpit configured itself. And then SSH as well, right? SSH is configured as soon as you install SSHD, which is SSH daemon, that listens on port 22. It puts a rule in the firewall here as well. And you can see up here, I told you all the default firewall, all the default zone is public. And you know how we didn't specify like -- zone or anything up here, so automatically it defaults to the public zone, and it's showing you what what rules are in the public zone. Okay, with that all said, that was just all review from last week. What I want you to do now is I want you to go into your into the assignment section. There's an assignment there now. And assignment 7, go ahead and download it, open it, whatever. The password's fall 2021. You should know that by now. And explore it a little bit. It takes a little bit. There's a lot of information there, so go slow. Don't just copy and paste the commands, okay? Read what I actually wrote in there. So we're going to take about 10 minutes or so to go over that. Take your time. There's not a lot of commands. If you just copy and paste the commands, you'd be done in a minute. But I want you to read what I'm saying in there because there's a lot of extra information that if we were to discuss on here and this and that, then you wouldn't have it in writing in the assignment. So I leave it there, go through it, make sure you understand it. Okay, so 10 minutes, it's 5:20 now. Let's get back here at 5:30, and hopefully you've gone through the guided section in the assignment 7, okay, in section 3. Okay, see you in a bit. And I'll read over the chat while you guys are doing that. Yeah, if everyone's stuck on task 7, you know, we can spend some time. I can do something, and we can go over that and make sure that you're not stuck there. Sorry, assignment 6, not assignment 7. I'm sorry, Stephen. I get out of sync because we didn't have one assignment for one class, so it's assignment 6. I apologize. In terms of the midterm assessment and task 7, like I said, email me, or put in the chat what exactly you're having difficulties with on step 7, and we can go over that and have a look. It does get kind of complex, right? And you really do have to think about how each group can access certain things. We have. Well, it really depends because I change it up every year. I don't keep it static as far as the assignment goes. So the question was, how many assignments will we still go through? You shouldn't say we still have to go through. You should say, how many assignments do we get to go through? Semantics, right? But yeah, it's really, if I feel, so this assignment, the Firewall D assignment, used to be much more complex. But I figured that, people were struggling with the midterm, and so I cut it down a little bit, and then we're going to integrate a lot of the more advanced commands as we go, instead of just focusing on a whole week of it. Yeah, no, I get it. I'm just joking, buddy. Um, so it really depends. I think, let's see, let me look at the dates. So 16th. I'm giving almost 2 weeks for this one too. Okay, so you got to the 30th to do this one, which is a very easy small assignment. And the reason I did that is because next week you also have the other the midterm assessment due, right? So I'm not stacking them on you. I'm giving you ample time. So and next week we will have also a little assignment as well. But these assignments are not going to be big, because what I'm going to be doing is giving you more time to do the midterm assessment and the final assessment. Yes, there is a final project, and we'll talk about it next week, and I give you it next week as well. And so the final project isn't such a big one. What it is you take the midterm project that you made, the VM, and then all these things that we've been learning, you start stacking them on that. So PAM, the firewall stuff, and then we're going to do like stuff like SE Linux. And so the next assignments after next week will also have a special section in it where it's saying add this to your final project. And so you're going to get to be able to add things to your final project every week, instead of like, getting it right at the end and giving you like a week or two, right? I mean, if you want to do it at the end, that's fine. So, we'll have the exam, and then right after the exam, I think we have another week to get the marks in. So, I think maybe I'll give you a few days after the exam. I'm not quite sure when the final date is going to be, but you might not have to hand it in before the exam. So you'll might get a few more days after that or whatever. But don't worry, it's not going to be big. It's just going to be adding these things on as you learn. And then at the end, you'll have the final VM with everything we've talked about, with everything we've set up, and a very secure VM. So, and on the final project, I'll just be marking the final stuff. I won't be marking the stuff that you already got marked on in the midterm. So, okay, I'll be quiet. I'm going to let you guys study for a bit. Yeah, that's right. So, as far as assignments, I mean, one, two, probably just two more assignments left in your final. And again, the final VM won't be a lot, right? It will just be little things like configure the firewall, maybe I'll make you, one of them actually I can even tell you. Um, I make you set up a web server, and on that web server, I make you put it on a non-standard port like 5000 or something instead of like 443 or 80. And then I make you configure in the firewall. And then when you do that, um, configure something called SE Linux. And SE Linux is going to require some configuration to put it on a non-standard port as well. So it's really not a lot of work. I give you the commands on how to set up the web server. They're literally like 4 commands. And from that, you just have to configure the firewall and configure SE Linux, like literally almost like 1 or 2 liner stuff, right? Not too crazy. But it's real world stuff, right? You got to know how to put it all together. I would say the hardest part left in this whole um, course is probably the step 7 and step 8 that you're working on right now, because that's probably the most confusing part. Everything after that is pretty straight. Okay, you know what? I've talked, and I don't know about you, but I can't. If I was reading that assignment, I can't listen to someone and do the assignment at the same time. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes from this point. Okay, so for 10:35, I'll be back, and so just spend the next 10 minutes reading over the assignment. Okay. Testing, 1, 2, 3. All right. How about 5:34? Probably good enough. So hopefully everyone's done the assignment or just had a chance to look over my amazing writing, my technical writing with tons of grammatical errors, I'm sure. I try to do my best. But hopefully everyone's had time to look that over and it made sense to you and I wasn't just a raving madman, which I've been called before. Okay, so let's go ahead and get on. So what are some of the things that we learned in that assignment? Well, we learned how to use the firewall command, how to list commands, to list the firewall. We looked at the default firewall, everything that we saw. My clicker's not working. One sec, let me get my clicker working on the right screen here. Voila. Oh, right here, everything we looked at the list all command, and we looked at a few other things, and I gave you some tidbits there. And so hopefully you got some hands-on with that firewall service. And so using Linux, firewall command and firewall D is something you're going to have to configure all the time. Don't ever disable it unless you have been told it's company policy to disable all the firewalls on all machines. Typically, how it works is that in a corporation you'll have the cloud here like this, right? And this is the internet, right? And information comes into your system. And here you have something called like a Cisco firewall, like a hardware firewall, right? Okay, and that's like actual device, that has like a bunch of lights on it and switches and everything, and some cables coming in and out of it and stuff. And it's an actual device that sits, at the company edge, right? And then, if wires go off to the computers and stuff, and maybe this wire is, going out to the internet or whatever. And that Cisco firewall controls most of it does the natting and controls most of the traffic that's coming into the actual data center or the servers. And then past that, you have, your actual VMs and your servers and stuff like this. So this would be Linux, right? And on that would be firewall D, right? And so typically by this point right here, most malicious traffic in a larger corporation has already been filtered out from the main firewall. So why, I say, always keep this firewall up, because you can still control traffic coming that this did not stop, okay? But also, you can control traffic coming from other servers. So here, let's say this is a Linux server, and this is a Windows server. And there's traffic going back and forth between these machines too. And so, on this Linux machine, maybe you don't want information from this Linux machine coming that way. Or maybe you don't want information from the Windows machine getting into this Linux machine. So you got to remember, there's a whole network inside the system, inside the corporation or the data center. And you're not always just worried about stuff coming from the outside. You're also worried about stuff coming from the inside. Now, why would you be worried about that kind of stuff? Put it in chat if you know why the firewall, this internal firewall, we like to call it here, because this is the external firewall, right? This controls the external stuff coming in. This is the first level firewall, right? And this would be, in this kind of situation, we would consider this the internal firewall, and this would be the second level firewall. Why would we want a second level firewall inside the actual, protecting from the other computers inside the actual network? Put it in chat if you know. It's not really apparent to most people, but as you get more into security, you'll start to realize why this becomes a really important feature. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. I'm pretty sure everyone's typing away. The reason? Probably not. It'll probably come up. But I'm going to start explaining it. I don't want to dwell on this too much. Well, what happens if on this machine, on a good old Windows machine, which we know that happens all the time, they get a rootkit? That's a terrible rootkit. It's ROOTKIT, I swear, that's what it is. Maybe for attackers with it, very good, Lily. Okay, Lily is the star for today. Okay, Lily is a star with the stars today. Lily's a star. Very good. So if this Windows machine gets a rootkit, what's going to happen is, the rootkit could also have a worm on it, and worms like to just try to figure out where they can go in the whole system and worm their way through. So by having this firewall on the system and blocking everything except certain ports, you're not allowing it to stay open to other machines in the system, which therefore can limit the attacker or the attack to certain machines. There's also stuff called IDS and all that stuff that happens inside the network as well, which I'm pretty sure you're learning in other courses, being this is a cybersecurity course. And so, that also will double check the internal network to see if there's any funny things going on. But most of the security features in most corporations, if they're not too big, they end up right here. They end up tapping between the Cisco firewall and watching what's happening on the Cisco firewall, denying traffic from even getting in. A lot of this stuff is not going back through the firewall. Okay, you see that? So therefore, sometimes like the security stuff, the main security apps like IDP and intrusion protocols usually sit right here. They don't necessarily always sit internally. So you always have to keep that in mind. Whatever Linux machine you make, or Windows machine or whatever, okay, I'm gonna give you the quote. And I had some role models in my life, believe it or not. There's been really smart people that I've had the pleasure to work with, and one of the best security people that I've met had a bigger tinfoil hat than I could ever make. The best security people are the most paranoid security people, bar none. Okay, he said, assume the attacker is already in the system. No. I know there's no attack. Quiet. That's what he said. No, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear that you just created this Linux firewall, this Linux machine. I don't care if you just created this network. The attacker is already there. I'd be like, no, you couldn't be. It's about quiet. I don't want to hear it. Seriously, okay? He said, always assume the attacker is already in the system, so secure your systems like that. Because I'll tell you, the best attacks, you will never know they're there, and that's why they're so good. It was 2 years ago. Actually, I think it was only a year ago. I don't know if you guys heard, but there was something called a SolarWinds hack. It was all over the CNN and stuff. This infiltrated big companies like IBM and I can't remember. Sorry, maybe it wasn't IBM, but it was a lot of government agencies and whatnot, and a lot of big names like, again, I can't remember the specific names, but like big companies like you would expect to see on the Fortune 500. And it was sitting there. The Russians were inside there with a special hack. I don't know if it's the Russian government. Sorry. A Russian agency was inside there with a special hack that was listening to traffic for 1 year before anyone noticed inside all the systems. And SolarWinds is a monitoring program. So a monitoring program gets to have access to all the machines in the network. So if they hack the monitoring program, there was no firewalls. That the monitoring program had pretty open access to all the machines. So any machine, if they attacked SolarWinds, the monitoring program, they were able to gain access to almost the whole network. And this was on big Fortune 500 companies. So always assume the attacker is inside the network. I want to see all of your firewalls as strict as possible. Only open the things you need. Don't open a whole bunch of stuff. So, when we're looking at stuff like some of these services here, like Cockpit, if you don't need Cockpit, okay, if Cockpit is not used in your organization, get rid of it out of the firewall. Okay, and so then you would just leave the DHCP client and the SSH client, SSH protocol. And those are the only services open on your firewall. Well, maybe you don't even use DHCP in your environment. Maybe it's all static IPs. So get rid of it, delete it out of your services. Don't let anything in that it's not actually active or you're using inside your corporation. And so this is a big problem, is that you'll consistently see, and I wrote all over my face, where little dark down there. Maybe I can go under my name over here. There we go. I just don't like when things are over my face. Always get rid of stuff that you're not going to use. And it's a big problem. So, you know, DHCP was configured in the firewall, and that is by default. So what happens if you set up all these Linux machines, or a junior or whoever, and left that service inside all those firewalls? Well, if you're not using DHCP, now that's opening up a hole that is not supposed to be open in the first place, right? There's no service listing on it, but it's open in your firewall. So think about that. Think about that for a second, okay? Think about that. Let's erase this and think about what I just said. I want you to think like Mr. Robot. I want you to think about how how an attacker thinks. Okay, so let's go ahead and erase this, and I'm going to show you why this is going to be a problem. I can erase it. Lily stays up there as a star. Okay, so this is going to have to dry off here. And so, and remember that quote. Remember, the best security professionals are the most paranoid and assume that the attacker is already in the system. Doesn't matter if you just built it. The attacker's already there. Assume it. Because you're never going to know. The best attacks you will never know. The only attacks you're ever going to figure out and you're actually going to see are the ones by script kiddies that don't really know what they're doing. They make mistakes. The real attackers, the real pen testers and cybersecurity people that have decades of experience, you will not see their attack. And that's the most dangerous one. It's what you don't see. How do you prove a negative? You don't, right? So you have to assume they're already there and develop your security policies based on that. You will become the best security professional if you follow those rules. I thought I dropped a pen. I saw it somewhere, but I didn't. Okay, so think about this. You have, and we're not going to use DHCP. We're going to make some, let's say there's some service. Let's call a service called, let's just say TCP port 5000. Let's say you created this Linux server, or a junior did, okay? Here's the Linux server, okay? Okay, this is the Linux server. Linux VM. And on here, when the junior set this up, maybe back in 2000, and well, maybe not a junior, previous employee, 2020, someone set this up in 2020. And originally, they set up a web program, okay, a web app. And instead of the web app sitting on port 880 or 443, those are the typical, like port 80 is for HTTP and port 443 is for HTTPS. Instead of setting it up on those ports, they set up port 5000. Okay, fine, whatever, right? Non-standard port, okay. So they had a port 5000 on here. And what was listing on here was the web application. I'm just going to put web, okay? Okay, so it was listing on port 5000 TCP. All right, on we go. 2021, that person no longer is with the company. Their little web project doesn't exist anymore. Okay, the next person came, or they took it down, and because it didn't work, maybe their manager didn't like it, or maybe it was done its time, right? But regardless, it doesn't exist on the actual server anymore. But what does exist is the firewall rule that they set up. It's still here on port 5000 TCP listening. But there's no application there anymore. Nothing. So if someone tries to get on port 5000 TCP, it's just going to return back connection refused. Okay, let's say an attacker somehow gains access to this machine here. Here's the attacker. And they get in through port 22. All right, they got in through port 22. Might be a little confusing, but anyways, they got in through port 22 here, okay? So they can SSH into this somehow. They can't really do anything on port 22 because they know that IDS or that firewall or the security ops is listening on port 22. There's only certain traffic can over that. They're not allowing certain tunnels or whatever. Okay, it's locked down. Let's just assume. Okay, we're taking a lot of liberties here. The first thing the attacker is going to do is look at the firewall to see how they can get in, and they're going to see this port TCP 5000, and then they're going to look on the server using LSOF or SS or whatever to see, that SS command, or some people might know it as netstat, to look at the ports that are open on the server. And they're going to see there's no processes listing on port 5000. And they're going to do a check and test. There's nothing on 5000. But it's open on the firewall. Bad thing. So what they can do now is they can set up another program, I'm just going to call it a hacky program. Not the official way to call it, but let's just call it a hacky program, okay? And it's listening. They set it up to listen on port 5000 TCP. Maybe the programmer doesn't have root. The hacker or the attacker does not have root, so they can't open the firewall or modify those rules. But they fired up a hacky program to listen on port 5000. Now, every other machine in the network can contact port 5000 and download the worm or the rootkit to other machines, because this port was open and nothing was listening on it. But the attacker got in somehow but didn't have root, had ability to load the program up to listen on port 5000 because the firewall was already configured with a hole in it. Okay? So it's very important to always audit your firewall rules. It happens a lot of times where someone opens up a firewall port and forgets about it. And then when they forget about it, that is a big security hole. They forgot, and it's already configured. Someone used root access to configure that to listen there. And attacker got in there, was able to open up a program that listened on. So that's a security hole way that attacker can start moving information around very easily. So be very careful about that, okay? Does everyone understand that? Hopefully, yes. Okay, so that's why I wanted to talk about this. Make sure that any services here you're absolutely using and the service is up and listening. If the service isn't up and listening, you're creating a security hole. Now, I understand there's sometimes services aren't going to be up and listening all the time. There is another way that we can get around that and look for that, and that's called SE Linux. And we're going to start talking about how SE Linux works, love it or hate it. Some of the more experienced Linux people probably hate SE Linux. But once you start understanding, you start to love it. And SE Linux will make sure that if Cockpit is not loaded and listening on port 9090, and an attacker tries to load up a program on your Linux machine to listen on 9090, SE Linux will, nope, the only thing that's allowed to listen on 9090 is Cockpit. So it terminates the program right away. So there are other ways to check to make sure these funny things don't happen. And SE Linux is that. And we're going to talk about that next week. Okay, so moving on. This one's very easy. We have one slide and then we have a lab here. What I want you to do, this is Cockpit here. And in our next lab, we're going to look at how Cockpit can be used to manage the network of the firewall, okay? So it's pretty simple. You log on to Cockpit. If this is a lockup here and it says, click for administrative access, click that. Make sure you put in the root password, and then you can click on the networking portion. And then once you're in networking, you have to actually click on the firewall rules, and then this will be brought up, okay? And then you can just easily click around here in the assignment. It tells you what to do. Just browse around. It's literally going to take you 5 minutes. I just want you to be familiar with the fact that Cockpit can manage Firewall D, but on a very simple basis. So go ahead and do the lab. We're going to only do 5 minutes for this one. It's very simple and straightforward. It's 5:53 now. I'll see you back at 6, okay? So 7 minutes. Okay, I'm back. Hopefully you had some time to check out Cockpit and get used to that. I mean, it's pretty straightforward stuff. None of that's complex, huh? I just wanted to make sure that you guys get used to it, that you know it's there, and that, you can always depend on using it if your current corporation allows. Okay, so moving on. This is a long class, probably been another 20 minutes or so, maybe not even, okay? We have the firewall command to add and remove, we can use that to add and remove services. So, for example, when you saw the Cockpit service there, anything, it was added using add service equals service. And to remove service, you can just do a remove service. Pretty straightforward stuff, isn't it? So in our example here, we're adding a Grafana service. And Grafana is actually used in metrics gathering and whatnot to create, graphs and all that stuff. And the purpose isn't understanding what Grafana here is. It's just I just picked out a service out of the already service list that we have there, and wanted to show you how you would go ahead and add that service if it wasn't already added. So, for example, we just go sudo firewall command add service and then equals Grafana, because Grafana was a service when I listed services. It was already created. And then to check it, all we do is a list all, and then I just grep for services, and it'll show me that line with the services. You can see Grafana has been added. And then to remove it, just do -- remove service equals Grafana. And then when I do the list there, it shows that it's been removed. Very, very simple stuff, not too complex. Now, the previous firewall before Firewall D was IP tables. IP tables was a lot more complex. You had to use a lot of switches and make sure that the chains were followed. Firewall command is a very easy command. It's something that came out in RHEL 7, and now it's continued in RHEL 8, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. RHEL 9 just got released. I haven't looked at RHEL 9, but I'm assuming that everything, Firewall D is still there. It's something that's pretty new, and it's just simple. Okay, and so let's say you didn't have a service, and you just so there's a lot of services such as SSH, Grafana. There's even a Bitcoin service. There's a whole bunch of already predefined services which you already should have seen in some of the labs. I think that I've already made you list the SSH service and whatnot, or maybe you do it in this lab now. I can't remember where I put that, but you'll see that there's a whole bunch of defined XML services already defined on your computer. And if those services aren't actually defined, you can go ahead and add your own port and protocol by using add port. And the way you do it is you just go add port and then equals the port name and then / the protocol, TCP or UDP. Okay. And then, so what you can do then is then, list the ports there while using grep, and you can see that ports have been added. So you might ask, what is the difference? Because there's an HTTPS service. So there's a service called HTTPS, and it's an XML file, and you can add that as a service to Firewall D. And inside that, it's saying that it allows port 443 TCP. TCP, not TPC. TP. Come on. TCP. Oh, look, I can spell. Okay, so inside that, you'll notice that allows 443 TCP. And so you're probably asking right now, what is the difference between adding the HTTP service or by adding it by port and protocol and just saying, 443 TCP, as we have up here. What is the difference? Well, I'll tell you, there is no difference. Zero, zilch, nada, no difference. The only difference is the way it looks when you list everything. So I'm going to go back a few slides here. No, back, not far. Okay, if we go back to this to list all here, you see how we have services. If you added HTTPS, it would add in here and it would say the service HTTPS, but it would actually be opening up port 443 TCP, right? Because inside the XML file, it defines that. But if we're adding it by port, it would show up here as 443 TCP, just like we have here. There was absolutely, and see when I grepped it out here, that's the services, grepped it out here. You can see it's under ports. There's absolutely no difference. You can add it through a service or you can add it through the ports. The one advantage you have by adding it by a service is that if it's a non-standard thing, like port 5000, people might not really know what port 5000 is used for. So if you add it down here, then they're going to have to look at, it won't be evident. They're going to have to look at the open ports, track which program's listing there and whatnot. But if you add it by service, like this, if you can create those XML files that define these services. And you can, inside there, create a custom one saying that, whatever, if you had a custom web app, you could call it, my web app service, my web app.xml. And then go ahead and inside that, put the port and protocol and description of it. And then you could add it by service instead of adding it by port and protocol. The advantage of this is someone just has to quickly look here saying, oh, the SSH is allowed, Grafana is allowed, the DHCP version 6 client is allowed, and Cockpit's allowed. If we didn't have Cockpit defined as a service and we didn't have an XML file for that defining port 9090 TCP, we would have to add it in. We'd have to add it in using the add port 9090 TCP, and then it would show up down here. But not everyone knows that Cockpit is the program that listens on 9090. So again, the advantage of adding it by a service is by people, it's everyday English. People know what Grafana is. Well, some people do. Maybe you don't. Doesn't matter. That's not what I'm trying to prove. I'm just trying to prove that when you call something like HTTPS, you know what HTTPS is. And then if you put 443 TCP, most people know that HTTPS is on 443, but not everyone. It might not be evident. So by adding it by service, we can quickly see what the service is. Okay, so that's the main difference between them. It's more semantics and more of a correct way to do things. The suggested way is always to do it by service. If the service doesn't exist, create the custom XML file and put the ports and the protocol inside that. But no one's going to throw you over the boat or throw you under the bus by actually putting the actual port and protocol there. So it's really whatever your company policy defines, but I will tell you, most of the time you're going to want it by service. Okay. Before we get a little further, we're going to have to talk about something called permanent rules. And what are these things up on here? These are tats, right? And tattoos are permanent. These ones specifically are. And there's actually people who have a Linux tattoo on them, and I think I'm going to get one. I think it's really geeky, and I think it's just awesome. I think I want one, right? But I'm not going to get the Relentless one. This is from Mr. Robot. That's a little overboard. It looks really cool, but I don't know if it would go with my my professional demeanor. The Linux one's kind of cool if you have it on a sleeve or something, and I mean, you live and die by Linux, right? Yeah, this one, don't type that in. We'll talk about that in a second. Just pretend that doesn't exist right now. So what do we got here? So permanent rules. What does that mean? Well, when you're adding rules to those firewall using firewall command, so for example, firewall command add service Grafana. Those rules are only getting added to the runtime. It's not actually getting added to the main default configuration file. If the firewall is reset, the rules will not save. They will reset to their normal, and you're going to see that in the next lab. So if you reset the firewall, reset your machine, and you just put this in, Grafana service will not be loaded on the firewall next time the firewall comes up. To make it permanent, you actually have to use this -- permanent flag to save that rule. Okay, otherwise it gets saved only to the runtime configuration. The permanent flag will save it to the actual the text file configuration file on your hard drive. So if you use the permanent flag, it will not put it in the runtime configuration. Yeah, that's exactly how it works. So this will actually load it into the runtime and make it immediate. This will not. This will only write it to the configuration file on your machine. So you either have to use both of these, or like to make the rule work right away and save right away, or you can just do add it permanently, and then use firewall command -- reload, and that will reload the rules from the disk, the permanent rules, into the running configuration file. Or yeah, like the running configuration, not file, but the running configuration config in your firewall, if that makes sense. So just understand that this is not permanent. All right, this is just making runtime configuration changes. If you reset the firewall, this rule will not be saved. You actually have to add the permanent flag, permanent parameter to make it save. But if you add the permanent parameter, it does not actually get added to the runtime right away. It just creates it just modifies the disk configuration file that has these rules in it. So you have to reload the firewall to load the configuration from the file. Okay. That makes sense. It should make more sense when you get some hands-on in your lab. So yeah, don't type this, please. Do not type this. Does anyone know what this is? Anyone? No? Yes? This is a fork bomb, okay? And so don't type this. And right now someone's doing this and they're saying challenge accepted, right? Okay, so if you want, you can type it. But here's the thing, it's going to crash your machine. So yeah, that's right, Yash. So if you want to really type this and see what happens, clone your machine out, like clone your VM, boot like another copy of your VM up, and then type this exactly, and see what happens. Your machine will probably work for about a few seconds, and then all of a sudden, everything will completely freeze. You won't even be able to reboot your machine, nothing. You won't be able to console your machine. You won't be able to log in. Yeah, it's just a fork bomb. It basically keeps forking processes until it basically DDoSes your own machine with this really cool command. And so if you're a super geek, like Yash and me, sorry, Yash, I don't know if you're a super geek, but from my discussions with you, you know quite a bit about this stuff, right? You'll see some people, Linux geeks actually with a shirt like this that just has this on their shirt. And people will be like, what's that? And it would just be kind of like an inside joke. That's actually a fork bomb. So if you type that, your whole machine will just lock up completely and you won't be able to do anything. And you'll have to hard reset your VM. So don't do that on your main VM. Clone it out. If you really want to check it out, type it on a cloned VM and have at it. And I'm going to move on from the slide. It's not on the PDF. If you want, you can just type Linux fork bomb and then Google and get the command from Google if you really want to type it, okay? All right, and we're on to our last lab, which is lab 3. Again, I told you this was not a long class because I want you to have time to be able to do your midterm assessment. So do this. It's basically just like we're adding rules to Firewall D, and it says we're going to resume in 10 minutes, but I'm not going to make you wait here for 10 minutes because that was the last slide. All right, so just make sure you look at the assignment, you finish out that assignment. It really doesn't take too long at all. You can see the unguided section is literally like, it'll take you 5 minutes each unguided section. It'll be nothing, okay? I didn't want to load you guys up this week because I know you have that assessment. I want you to focus on that. So practice all commands and concepts presented in this lesson, all guided and unguided labs in this assignment. Make sure you do them. I want you to work on the midterm assessment project and practice, practice, practice. That makes you a good security person, I guess. I was like searching for a word there. Good security person, okay? And don't panic about, the midterm assessment. I am getting a lot of Teams PMs right now asking for some clarification on on step 7. So I will look over everything there and I will send out some clarification on it and give you some examples, okay? Because if you're really stuck on that, then that's going to make you stuck on the whole thing. So I'll give you some examples. Maybe I'll throw out like a YouTube video showing you, how to do one of them or something, and that should get you going, okay? All right, fini. Now let me talk a little bit about what the plan is going forward here. Let me get my screen up. Okay, so what is the plan going forward? Because I briefly, you had the midterm assessment. And, you know, a lot of you were smart enough to say, well, if there was a midterm assessment, what does the final assessment look like? Well, the final assessment is going to look like this. And sorry, Lily, it looks like I got some sprayed it last time and it kind of dripped. It's like a goth star now. Okay. Oh, and you know what? We got another star up there too now. We got Yash up there because Yash knew what a fork mom was. That was pretty cool. Okay. All right, so this is how it's going to look. If I could, I think I need to replace my rag. I keep going over it and over it, and it doesn't seem to. All right. Started a joke. Okay, so how this is going to work is like this. All right, we have our midterm assessment. I'm just going to put a midterm assignment, right? And so you're going to finish up that next week, okay? And what this encompasses everything, I think it was like from 1 to 5 or 6. 5. Lessons 1 to 5, in and around, right? And so lessons 1 to 5 encompass this whole midterm assignment, you know, installing Linux, setting up users in groups, all that stuff we did. And so when you submit that to me, which I'll give you some instructions next class on how you can submit that, where you're going to put that to AWS, okay, or to Blackboard or whatever. I haven't on the weekend. Our class is on Friday. On the weekend, I didn't have time to look into that yet, but I will. And then so every class after this, such as PAM, such as firewall, firewall D and all that stuff. Okay, these ones specifically, I'm going to give you how to, some steps and some tasks on how to integrate these into this. Okay, so you're going to continue working on that VM that you created here. All right, and you're going to start doing these next things that we learned and start adding them on to this VM. So next week, next week I'll give it to you, I guess, or it has to be after you. So the week after that, I'm going to give you the PAM and firewall D of the tasks that you have to add on to that VM. And the reason I'm not giving you it already, because I don't want people to be confused. I don't want this done yet to this VM. I want you just to do what I currently gave you, submit that in. I will mark it. And then you can start working on these. And so this is just going to be simple, configuring so root can't log into certain TTYs and stuff. And so it's not just going to be a big thing right at the end where I just give you, hey, do all these tasks. You got 1 week. It's not going to happen. We're going to stay on top of it every week now. Okay. So get this done, get this in. And then after that, I'll give you a few tasks that you have to add on to it. And then every week during the assignment, like at the end, there'll be a special section saying what you have to add to that final. And then so I will give you to almost like the last day, even, if we have if we have the exam early, which we'll probably will, because it'll be on a Tuesday, there's still all the way up to Friday or Saturday to do it, to work on the last task. So I'm not completely promising. I have to look at the dates and whatever, when the college wants all the marks in, but I will give you to the last possible second to finish that midterm assessment. So don't worry about that, okay? I know that at the end, you're studying for a lot of midterms. You got a lot of things going on. These tasks are not going to be hard, okay? They're just going to be simple stuff. And if we're doing them every week and keeping up with them, you're always up to date, okay? So at the last class, if you've kept up and you kept up on your assignments doing them, you should only have one task and then to hand in your final VM, okay? And that's another 20%. All right, so don't freak out. It's going to be easy stuff. It's just building a VM and it's like a final project at the end. Instead of making the whole written midterm or final 30%, which I don't think anyone wants, right? I certainly don't want it. I don't think that's a good assessment. It would be open book anyways. I don't see your skills. You're just answering multiple choice, which is not how Linux works in the first place, right? So hopefully you're on board with that one, that this is probably a better assessment of your skills. Okay, so it looks like I disconnected and connected. I don't know what happened there. I'm looking at chat and I saw my screen flash, but hopefully the stream is still working. Can you guys still hear me? And if so, do you have any questions before we wrap this one up? And not questions specifically on the assessment or anything like that. I know I'm going to look at all the people's issues and then see if I can, okay, cool. And then see if I can come up with some sort of way that I can help you there. Let me just quickly look, 1 second here. I'm just going to look at some of these suggestions. Maybe we can just discuss it in this class if it's not too complex. If the questions are all the same, maybe I can just clarify in this class. Let's see. Let me have a look here. 1 second. Midterm, okay. I'm going to bring it up here. So we're talking about question 7. Most people are having problems with. Create the following directories and assign, Seriously, Ryan? And assign. Nice. The correct permissions so that the listed team can access the directory and files inside of them. All right, so this shouldn't be too tough. I mean, you're creating a directory here, and then the team is accounting, which is the group, right? And so you want to assign the group to this directory, right? And then you want to make sure that those permissions are set for that group. Does that make sense? That group should have read, write, and execute access on that. Yeah, so it's the group. So if you look, so there's 2 ways there in Linux files, right? There's 2 ways that you can. Let me see if I have a VM open. It's Kali because it's from my other class. Open the Kali up because that's what I got here. You guys want to see a man in the middle attack? You don't worry, you will later. All right. So if you look, if I sudo, let me just get into complete root here, and this is something I tell you never to do, but I'm just going to do it for ease of purposes here. So I said go into var and create a shared directory inside, right? In here, and now create like an accounting directory, and then you're in here and have a look at the user in group on the accounting directory, right? It's just root, right? But that's not what we want. You want to be able to, you have to add group accounting, right? And then so what you can do is change group, or you can use change group accounting. I'm probably getting this the wrong way. Right. So now you have the group accounting here, right? And so you want to make sure in the group name, in the group permissions, right, on accounting. And so now if you look at it, the read, write, and execute permissions for accounting. So anyone that's in the accounting group will be able to access this directory and then access the files inside of it. Okay. So that's what's being asked there. Let me see here. Go back to the actual Word document. And so you just have to basically, make sure that you create all these directories, and then assign the correct group to that directory. Yeah, no worries. And it says, ensure no other people besides root should be able to access these folders, other than the people in these teams. That means even Mike, the guy, the min that you set up, or the user that you set up, shouldn't be able to access these unless Mike used sudo. The only exception is the var share public folder that everyone should be able to access. Okay? So you just got to make sure that anyone in the accounting team or the accounting group can only access these files. So what is the problem, or anything in that directory? So what is the problem with our current setup that I just did right here? Have a look at these permissions. What are the first set of permissions here? Do we remember what that is? Those are the user permissions. And these are the group permissions, right? And these are the other permissions. Well, it said make sure that no one else on the machine besides people in the accounting group can access this directory. So you also have to do a change mod other and then get rid of read, write, and execute access on the directory as well. All right, another way you could have done this is chmod 770 counting, right? And then so if you look at it, what this has done is it's saying, okay, well, the root user, because it's owned by root, can read, write, and execute any file in there, and that's fine. We said the root could be able to access it, right? That makes sense. But we also said that we want to make sure that the group accounting can access the directory and any files in here as well. But we didn't want any other people besides a user or groups to be able to access any files or this directory specifically. You want to make sure that read, write, and execute for the other groups are not enabled. And you can see by default, other groups can read and execute files in there when you created the directory. Okay. So then you would have to go ahead and set up something like administration. Right? And administration would be people like CEOs and managers and stuff. Maybe they're sharing your confidential information about employee salaries and stuff like that. So that's a very important one. If you go add group and then you would type in administration, and then you would say, and I did chmod before, but you can also do chgroup. Well, actually, I did chgroup before. You can do chown, and then I would say I put the dot, which basically means for groups, and I could say the administration group on the administration file. Okay, and then you have a look here, and you can see now administration group owns the administration directory, but you can see these file permissions are wrong, right? And so what did I say was the proper file permissions for the 770 administration? All right, and so when we do that, we can see that the group can read, write, and execute, which is the group permissions, but any other groups or any other users besides root or people in the administrative group can't do anything here, okay? And so that's what this is saying. It's just saying we want to make sure that we can share we can put files in here, but only the users inside these special folders can read those files. But the public one, you want anyone on the server to be able to access. So how do we do that? Well, let's look back again. Look back at here, and then if I go make dir and I go public, have a look. And so you can see right away it's owned by root and root, which I guess is fine because all we need to do is just say chmod 777, which basically means all permissions for all people on the public folder. And so you can see this has gone a weird color now. You can see it's highlighted like with the background. Very good, Vekis, yeah. That's highlighted in a weird highlight here. It's telling you that because it's saying, hey, anyone can access this file. So it highlights it weird like this just to make sure that you know that anyone on the server can access that file or that directory. Okay. And you can keep it as root because it doesn't matter because, well, root can access it there. The user group can also access it, but any other person on the server can access it as well. So this is, since read, write, and execute are there for the other users, this really doesn't matter because anyone who's not root can access it too then, okay? Could you explain how one group can access multiple folders in this setup? Since the assignment, some groups need to be accessed more than just one folder. Yeah, that's a good point too. So let's keep reading through it. So you're talking about right here, right? Anyone on the server? Oh, okay. Set up special permissions. Request on the folder defined by your boss. So email from your boss of this document. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at email your boss. The security team must be able to access everyone's files for security reasons. This means security should be able to read and write from these files, right? Multiple groups, okay? So look at this. Remember I told you that you can add users to multiple groups, right? You remember that? It still applies. Let me find my VM here. The objective isn't for me to do this assignment for you, but I want to make sure you're not stuck here because I know this is oh, come on, which one? There it is. There it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a user, and I'm going to call that. I'll call that David, right? And David is from. Let's make sure David's from security, and I'm just going to put some random password in here. All right, so David is added. So we have a user named David. Okay, there's David right there. And we have some. Oops. Okay, so this is not a CentOS machine. This is a Ubuntu machine, so it's going to be completely different. So regardless, without getting into the weeds here, I'm not going to try to show you all the different files here because that's just going to confuse people, especially if they haven't listened to the whole lecture and they're just trying to pop in at the last second. So I'm not going to. This won't work because we're on a Ubuntu machine, not a Kali machine. It's set up a little different. But there's a David user here, okay? And so if we look at the David user inside here, we can see that if we go ID David, we can see that David belongs to the David group and the David is David user and the David group. So there's things called primary groups and supplementary groups. Okay, so if we look at user mod and do a help, you can see in here that we can assign the main primary group to the user, which is already David. But we can also add David to supplementary groups as well. Right? So if you look at this again, have a look at David. You can see that David is on the primary group. Oh, sorry, right here. David is on the primary group, and these are the supplementary groups. I'm sorry, I get confused. I'm not looking at properly at this. This is the group, the user ID, and this is the primary group for David. And these are the supplementary groups for David. If you wanted to add David to a few groups, you can do that. So you can go user mod, add, and then large G here. And let me just make sure it's the same for Ubuntu. Yeah, so large G is supplementary groups. And we're putting add supplementary groups. And I hope the command is the exact same on Ubuntu. And I could say, I want to add David to the administration group. So it's not. Oh, I didn't put David. There you go. Okay, and so if you type in David now, you can see David is also part of another group. So if we look here, because David is part of the administration group, David can now go into the administration directory because David has that group membership. So we can add David also to another group, the accounting group. Okay, and David. And now have a look at this. Okay, accounting there, and then ID David, and you can see David is part of the accounting and the administrative group now. Does that make sense? So a way you can also double check, by the way, if you set a password on the users, and you can always, if you didn't set a password on your users, you can go password and then type David or whatever, and as root, that will allow you to set a password on David's account. If you were to do that, and then you type SU David, what this will allow you to do is switch to the user David. As you can see, I'm now the user David. And so you can go ahead and check these things. You can type LS, and you can see if you can go into the accounting directory. Okay, I'm in the accounting directory. Can I touch a file? I can. Look at that. Can I remove the file? Yes, I can. Oh, great. Okay, can I go into the administrative directory? Can I touch a file? Yes. Can I delete a file? It's gone. Okay, so David can get into both. All right, well, let me exit out of that SU and go back to root. Let me remove that group from David. All right. I'm just going to set it to one thing. I'm just going to set it to, instead of going, I'm just going to set David right back to nil. So I'll show you. It'll be easier. I'm going to set David's supplementary groups just back to David. Okay. So if we ID David again, it's back to what it should be. Okay. Now I'm going to SU back to David. All right, here we go. We're back in David, and we're doing a list of accounting and administration. Let's see, accounting. Oh, permission denied. Because David doesn't have that group permission anymore. Can I get in? Can David get into administrative? No, he can't. See that? And if David IDs himself, he can see he's not part of those groups, so he can't get in, right? So use that SU and then switch to the user to double check things to make sure that you can, as that user specifically, it's set up the way that it should be. So for example, let's say if I just go ahead and user mod and then add David back to the accounting group and then SU back to David. All right, so now David should be able to get into accounting, which David can, touch file, no problem. David can actually share and get into that accounting file. But since David is not part of the administrative group anymore, David's still denied permission to administration. I know it's confusing, and that's why I give you 2 weeks, and that's why you ask these questions, and that's why I didn't give you a lot of hints at the start. Because the thing about Linux, I'll tell you, the thing about Linux and the way you learn is by trying things. If I would have just given you all the answers right away and said, "This is what you do," and showed you this, you wouldn't have ripped your hair out. And see, I just want everyone to look like me because not having hair is just awesome, right? No, I'm just joking. Don't look like me. But if you try things in Linux, you will learn them a lot better than if you just follow directions. It's when you fail and you start ripping your hair out and you go, oh, and you're sitting there for 2 hours. That's when you really get the insight on how things don't work or how they work. And it's when you get into those fires and you're just like, oh, this is really making me mad. That's when it sticks with you. Okay, so the more you experiment, the more problems you get into, and the more you're able to get out of them or fix them or solve them, that's how you learn in Linux. Just a matter of hands on a keyboard and trying things. Okay, yeah, totally. I was talking about the other day. I was talking about there was a GPS time bug, and I don't know if you heard about it on NTP and cronny time servers in corporations. There's NTP servers, and they keep a time using an atomic clock, such as government agencies or whatnot, and then they also have a GPS clock that they can sync out to. And there was a GPS time bug, and that happened on October 24th. And on October 24th, it was like the Y2K bug. If you're using a GPS clock to sync all the servers in the data center, suddenly the service would go back to April 2002. Yeah, weird. It's like a week rollover bug. It's a bug in the GPS calculation. So we had to make sure that we did not roll back to 2002. We made sure that all of our servers were on the atomic time source instead of the GPS time source. And I made a joke back then. I said, hey, I would love to go back to 2002. I'd still have a full head of hair. Some bad things like Nickelback was still playing on the radio like every second. Some good things. Britney Spears was at the top of her career. Lord of the Rings was just being released. The second one, The Two Towers, right? 2002 was a good year, but some things I'd like to go back for, and then some things I'm just glad I'm not in college anymore. I loved college, but I've learned so much since. And to go back and do it all over again, you're like, oh, what a mountain to climb. And that's leads on me to another thing I want to tell you guys. Sometimes it feels like all this stuff, there's a big mountain to climb, and there's so much information thrown at you, and that is true. But after a certain amount of years in the industry, you look back and you go, huh, wow, I can't believe everything I've learned and how far I've come. And that's how you need to measure yourself, not where you are now, but where you are 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And the way you do this, and it's what I used to do when I was back in college, there was this gentleman named Tony Robbins. I don't even remember him. He's got a bunch of books out. He's that inspirational speaker. And he was one of my mentors. He was on the infomercials all the time. I was watching and I just watched him and I was going, man, can you imagine being able to stand in front of people and have that energy and have that amount of inspiration and ambition for life? You could do anything. But so I took a lot of that, and that's why a lot of the way I am. I've read a lot of books and watched a lot of mentors in my life. But one thing I took from Tony Robbins, you need to imagine who you're going to be, not who you are now, who you're going to be. So if you imagine that you're going to be this super uber Linux nerd, which I did, and you're going to dive right into it, and you're going to be successful and everything. You imagine that in your mind, and you will become that, because subconsciously and consciously you will make all the proper decisions along your life. And then when you look back, it doesn't feel like there was no time where I just said, wow, I've made it. It's all those little wins over time, and then you look back and you go, wow, how far we've come, right? So a little bit of, I know we're going way off course here, but really that's what I tell a lot of the juniors and a lot of people I mentor, is measure yourself by years, not by minutes, and look at how much you've accomplished, and imagine who you want to be, and you will become that person, because you'll make all the sacrifices to become that person eventually. Okay, going back to the chat here, some people are laughing at me. La, 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 la. I laugh at myself all the time. All good. I make the directory name share as per the table, but everywhere else it is mentioned shared. Not quite sure what you mean by that. This sounds like it get quite complex when you are dealing with thousands of employees. Yeah, Lily, it can. We have file shares that have 1,000 different usernames that get to be shared. But it doesn't happen. Rome wasn't built in a day. I mean, these servers aren't typically built up that quick. They usually start with 10 and 20. But you can also make scripts to do this as well. So the way most people do this is when a new person gets in the company, is you create a bash script or a Python script or whatever that does all these steps for you, creates the user, links them to the groups that they're supposed to be linked in, and all that stuff. And or if it's not, when you get really large, you're using something called like an identity server or an LDAP server, like I mentioned in the previous classes, which you go on the LDAP server and you set up all the groups that they need to be part of, right? So it's more of you're setting it up, their permissions on the LDAP server, and then those folders and everything, security, accounting, and all that stuff would already be on the file server anyways. You just set up the username on the LDAP server, the groups that they're supposed to be part of, and then they're able to access all that information. I know that I can add multiple groups to a single user, but I am thinking that there is a way to create a group which will have the permissions from other groups. Well, why don't you try that, Chris, and see if that works for you, okay? Let me know, and let us know. There's a million different ways to skin a cat, and I'm not going to give you every way, but I want to see if people come up with these ways. I look at some people's assignments, and I've asked X, Y, and Z, and I'm looking at it, and then I look at Chris, your assignment, and that is brilliant. And sometimes, or some of you have seen that in the comment section, I go, that is brilliant. I'm giving you extra marks for that, or something like that. And so sometimes you guys really impress me. I didn't even teach that. I can see your thought process and why you did it a certain way, and I'm like, that's amazing. So any way you can do it, it's up to you. They need to be able to have the access. There is another way that you can control file access on files, and it's not just the normal user groups and others permissions. There's something called ACLs, file ACLs, which we're going to touch on a little bit, but I didn't want to get too much into the weeds because typically you never really have to get that complex. But there is something that's not just in those read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, write, execute. There's something that goes beyond that, which was brought in after the original file permissions because they realized they needed a little more control over who's able to access stuff. And in those ACLs, you can specifically call people out instead of just grouping them into other. And you can say, this person gets these accesses and whatnot. And I will touch on that a little bit. I didn't want to get into that too much because that's getting a little too much into the weeds. But I did want to mention it. Okay, so there are other ways we can do these things. But this assignment specifically, you should just follow the very simple process. But I wouldn't get too much into the weeds. Great words. Thanks for sharing. Perfect. Yes. Again, I had some great mentors in my life. And I know that a lot of other people have had great mentors and will. And never be scared to admit someone else knows more than you. Okay, that's how you succeed in life. By looking up someone and saying, not having an ego about it, by looking at someone and saying, wow, you're brilliant. And then learning everything you can from that person. That's how it works. That's how people succeed. And so the more mentors you can surround yourself with, the more people that you can surround yourself with that know more than you, the faster you will succeed. And they will help you if they like you. That's a very important skill as well. So surround yourself with successful people, the people that you want to be like. If you don't know many of those people, one good resource is the IRC. So there's something called the Internet Relay Chat. IRC, Internet Relay Chat. It's been around since the start of time, I think 3,000 years ago when the rings were forged and in the depths of Mordor, IRC was still around. Not really, but it was around like at the start of the internet, like this, way before AOL was carpet bombing people in the 90s trying to get on the internet. So what it is, it's a text chat. It's not really cool like Facebook or anything like that, where these like emojicons or all that stuff. It's real text chat. It's like being in a Linux shell and you just see someone's name in their chat, kind of like, well, not even as fancy as YouTube. It's real text. But inside here, there's stuff like Freenode and all these different servers. And then there's a Linux channel. There's a Red Hat channel. There's a networking channel. There's all these different channels that the biggest geeks in the world talk on IRC. You can listen to their chats and ask questions and whatnot. And you're surrounding yourself with like-minded people, the people that you want to be like. That's what you should do. Try to find out these places where they're chatting, Stack Overflow even. Be a part of that, get to know people, start networking that way, get to understand, immerse yourself in their lingo, okay? And that's how you become that person. You don't become that person by just sitting back and watching TV. You become that person by saying, I'm actively want to be like that person. And then do everything that person does. And, try to find chat channels where other people like that person or the people you want to be are actually chatting and get into it. You might not understand completely what they're saying all the time, but ask questions. They'll help. Okay, back to chat. Lily, community forums. Yeah, Yash. Community forums are good. IRC is really good as well. But yes, generally, anywhere you can be talking to different people and contributing. Tech TV, email, number 4, email from boss. The subdirs are var shared subfolder versus var share subfolder. I think that is what the subdirs are var shared. Oh, is there? Okay. That's a mistake then. Yeah, no, it should be var shared or var share. Let's see here. I don't, my script will look for both because that's obviously an issue. look here. Ah. Okay, so let's do var shared. All right, and thank you for that. I will make the proper edits and then make sure that you know, the new PDF goes out, and I'll make sure that people know. Now, if you mess that up, I mean, it's pretty easy to change. So if you go to, and I apologize, sometimes when you make these things and you recreate them, there's little errors like that. So okay, so let's say I did a, you know, made this thing var shared instead. Let's say, you know, so I'm in var shared now. Let me go back one. Let me get out of root for. Let me get back to root. So you have to be root. Imagine this was called share instead, right? Well, let's just share. I'm just going to make sure that everyone makes it shared. So all you have to do is, as root, go back to the var directory and then say move share to shared, and that will rename that folder as shared. Right, so it's very simple. If you made if you got confused by my mistake there, so well, let's just make everything shared. Okay, the script will look for shared. I'll put out an announcement, and if for some reason someone put share and it completely falls flat on its face, you know, I'll modify the script to look for share as well. But let's try to make sure it's all shared. Okay. There you go. That's right, Chris. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I do appreciate that. All right. Any other questions? Those are good questions. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. No questions. Look at this. All right. Well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up. So, you know, make sure that you work on that. You know, it's due next week. I think it's due like Friday next week. So you have, I think, right? I think it's like November 30th, right? So you have a bit of time. I think that's what it is. Sure. But anyways, yeah, again, so, you know, work on it. If you have questions, let me know. I will help you out. And so if your friends are also struggling with, you know, that on step 7 or step 8, show them this live stream, which will be saved in YouTube, and they'll be able to solve that as well, right? Just the multiple group things are what's going to get you past that multiple share issue, okay? And you know, if you get experience, this is something that you're going to have to do in the Linux world as security people. You'll be called in maybe to solve some of these problems, because as security people, you're gonna be expected to know how security groups and users work. That's why I'm trying to make it a little more complex than a general. Just change the directory and let one user access it. Because as security people in the cybersecurity world, you also want to know, you want to be able to check for multiple user ownership groups as well. You have to have it in your brain that that could be a possibility, and you got to look for those little loopholes. Like, just because a person's name is David and they're part of the David group doesn't mean they can't have supplementary groups as well. So you always have to be checking for that. Okay, well, if that's it, I think we're done. So I do really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy days to join me in this very late class. I understand 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock sucks. Not for me, I love it anytime, but I mean, for students who have been at school all day, I know that's the last thing you want to do. But hopefully these are entertaining enough, and I make enough jokes about myself to make you laugh. That's my objective. So if you have any problems, let me know. Otherwise, we're closing up the class. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you very much.